I couldn't believe it. Standing there in front of me were Tina Mullally, the HOA president, and a group of developers, all of them smiling like they owned the world. The piece of land that my grandfather worked so hard to build, my family's legacy, was now being torn apart. And yet, they stood there as if they were doing me a favor. "Mr. Briggs, I'm sure you'll understand," Tina said, her voice sweet but condescending. "We've got all the legal paperwork. This land is being developed properly, and there's nothing to be concerned about." I stared at her, holding my breath. I wanted to shout, but I knew I had to stay calm. "What paperwork are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my family's land. I've got the deed right here." Tina waved her clipboard in the air dismissively, her lips curling into a smile that only made my blood boil. "Oh, we've got everything in order," she said. "Surveys, zoning permits, everything you could possibly need." One of the developers, a tall man with slicked back hair, stepped forward, holding out a document. "This land was never properly surveyed," he said, his tone flat. "It's been abandoned for years. The records show that it's available for development." I took the papers from him, scanning them quickly. They looked legitimate, but something wasn't right. My heart pounded as I realized what they were trying to do: erase my family's history and seize the land that was never rightfully theirs. They thought they could pull this off without anyone noticing. "Abandoned?" I repeated, my voice growing tighter. "This land has been in my family since 1943. My grandfather worked it himself, and now you're telling me it's abandoned?" Tina nodded, her expression patronizing. "That's what the county records show," she said. "I'm just following procedure." I felt my chest tighten. I didn't know what to say anymore. My mind was spinning. These people were trying to take what was rightfully mine, and they didn't even seem to care. They had the money, the connections, and the influence, and I had nothing but a deed and a history they wanted to erase. I left them standing there, my thoughts clouded with disbelief. I needed help. I couldn't let them get away with this. That's when I thought of Jim Crawford. He was an old family lawyer, the kind of man who knew the ins and outs of property law better than anyone. I called him as soon as I could. Jim listened patiently to my story, his voice calm but serious when he responded. "This is going to be a tough one, Colton. The developers have connections. They've probably got local officials in their pockets, and Tina, she's not as innocent as she seems." I felt a lump in my throat. "What can I do? I don't have the money to fight all of them." Jim's voice softened. "You've got something they don't, your family's legacy. You can't back down now. This is about more than property. It's about justice." I didn't know what I was up against, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. Not without a fight. The first legal notice from the HOA arrived about 2 weeks after that confrontation with Tina. I opened it with a sinking feeling in my stomach, knowing it wasn't going to be good. The letter accused me of violating community standards, specifically for environmental hazards and nuisance levels caused by my cattle. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Environmental hazards? I muttered to myself, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. This is my land. This is my livelihood. But I wasn't laughing for long. Over the next few days, I received more letters, each more ridiculous than the last. Noise complaints, air quality violations, even one claiming that my ranch posed a threat to public health. The HOA was pulling out all the stops. I could feel it. The isolation creeping in. Neighbors I'd known my whole life, people who'd once waved and stopped for chats, now avoided eye contact. When I drove by, they'd quickly turn their heads or walk in the opposite direction. It wasn't just the developers anymore. Tina had poisoned the whole community against me, and it was working. I could hear Tina's voice in my head, that fake sweetness, as she spread the rumors. "You know, some of the families are really concerned about the smell from the livestock," she'd say to anyone who would listen. "And the noise from the trucks, it's really starting to affect property values. We need to do something." It was manipulation at its finest. And it was working. I could see the change in the way people looked at me. What happened to the respect I'd earned from years of hard work, from keeping the ranch going even when times were tough? I couldn't let it stand. I had to do something. That night, I sat in the old study of my family home, papers spread out before me. The dusty, old property deeds my grandfather had kept in pristine condition for years. I dug through them, looking for anything that might help. Old tax records, surveys from decades ago, and letters from county officials. I needed to know where I stood. I needed evidence to fight back. Hours passed, and I felt my frustration build with every piece of paper I flipped through. The legalese of zoning laws and land surveys were enough to make anyone's head spin. But I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Then, I found something. Hidden among the dusty old records was a set of documents that made my blood run cold. Contracts. The developers had made deals, under-the-table deals, with local officials. The handwriting was almost identical to the signatures on the forged surveys Tina had waved around. There it was. The proof. They had been lying, colluding with corrupt officials to steal what was rightfully mine. My hands shook as I held the papers, the weight of what I had just uncovered crashing down on me. But then a thought struck me. The deeper I dug, the more I felt like I was drowning in a sea of paperwork, contracts, and legal jargon. Could I really win against all this? Was I strong enough to fight back? I didn't know. But I couldn't stop now. I had no choice but to keep going. I spent the next few weeks sifting through old files, emails, and phone records, anything I could get my hands on to make sense of this mess. My eyes were sore from staring at a computer screen late into the night, but I had no choice. I couldn't let this land grab slip through my fingers. Not after everything my family had been through. Then, one evening, after hours of digging, I stumbled upon a series of emails between Tina Mulallery and a few local officials. The subject lines were innocuous: zoning changes, Pinewood Estates approval, but as I read through the chain, my heart sank. Tina was negotiating directly with these officials, offering them incentives in exchange for pushing through zoning changes that would allow the developers to build on my land. The emails were clear: these were bribes. They were fixing the rules to suit their development plans, and my family's property was caught in the middle. I leaned back in my chair, the gravity of what I had uncovered weighing heavily on me. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was a full-fledged conspiracy, a coordinated effort to steal what was rightfully mine, and they'd been getting away with it for years. I felt a mix of triumph and anger. I had the evidence, emails, phone records, even meeting minutes, that proved everything they had told me was a lie. The land wasn't abandoned. It wasn't uninhabitable. And the developers' claims? Completely fraudulent. I could feel the weight of the truth in my hands, but at the same time, it felt like an impossible mountain to climb. How could I fight this? How could I win against people with so much power? I knew the media was on their side. I'd seen the articles, the slanted headlines claiming that my ranch was a public nuisance. And the neighbors, my own neighbors, seemed to have fallen in line with whatever Tina had said. They saw me as the problem now, not the other way around. I was isolated, outnumbered, and surrounded on all sides. But then something shifted inside me. Holding those emails, seeing the corruption laid bare in black and white, I realized I had the power to change the narrative. This wasn't just about defending my land. It was about reclaiming my family's name, about standing firm against an injustice that went deeper than I had ever imagined. I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. This fight had become more personal than I ever expected, but it was a fight I was determined to win. If I didn't, what would be left of my family's legacy? What would be left of the land that had been ours for generations? I had to do this, not just for me, but for everyone who had been fooled by Tina's lies. It was time to make my stand. With Jim Crawford by my side, I filed a lawsuit. It felt like a huge step, like I was taking my first real swing at the developers, the HOA, and the corrupt officials who'd been pulling the strings behind the scenes. My heart raced as I signed the papers. I was in it now. This was happening. Jim was confident, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "This isn't going to be easy," he said, his voice low. "The developers have a lot of pull around here, and Tina Mullally isn't going to just roll over. She's got a playbook, and she's going to use every tactic she knows to delay, distract, and deflect." I nodded, already anticipating the battle ahead. I'd seen what Tina could do, how she'd manipulated the neighborhood, the media, and now she was going to paint me as the villain. I could already hear her. "He doesn't care about the community. He doesn't care about the safety of the children. He's just out for himself." That was her tactic, emotional appeals that twisted the truth. It was infuriating, but it was all part of the game. And the media? They ate it up. The articles painted me as the bad guy, someone too stubborn to let go, too attached to a piece of land that didn't fit into their ideal community. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all, but I couldn't. I had to keep my focus. As the weeks dragged on, the pressure built. The harassment escalated. Neighbors who'd once spoken to me in passing now avoided me altogether. I could see it in their eyes. They were afraid. Afraid of standing up to Tina. Afraid of being dragged into this fight. My blood boiled as I watched the neighborhood I grew up in fracture right before my eyes. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I started talking to the people who were still willing to listen, the ones who were quietly behind me. Slowly, I began to rally the neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak out. One by one, they came forward, voicing their support. Some were tired of the lies, some were tired of Tina's manipulation, and some just wanted to see things go back to the way they were. But together, we were stronger. The day of the public hearing, my hands shook as I walked into the courtroom. I had all the evidence, emails, phone records, documents. I laid it all out in front of the judge, in front of the media. I exposed Tina's corrupt ties, the under-the-table deals, and the fraudulent paperwork that had been used to justify this whole mess. I watched as Tina squirmed in her seat, but she didn't back down. She still had her defense, her story. The judge's decision was postponed, but I could feel it in the air. Things were shifting in my favor. It wasn't over yet, but the momentum was on my side now. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. I was in this fight to win. As the days went by, something started to shift. It was subtle at first, little whispers in the neighborhood, people starting to question what was really going on. And then, slowly, I started hearing from people who had been too scared to speak up before. One evening, as I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through more paperwork, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Briggs," a voice said. "This is David Green. I used to work for Pinewood Estates developers. I wanted to talk to you." My stomach tightened. David Green? One of the original developers? What was he doing calling me? I was part of the team that got pushed out of the project, he said, almost sounding relieved to get it off his chest. I couldn't stand what they were doing. I didn't agree with how they were handling things. I'm not the only one who saw it, but I'm the only one willing to talk. I leaned forward, my heart racing. What do you know? He paused, then began recounting what he had witnessed, the illegal zoning changes, the meetings with local officials that had been more about greasing palms than making any real progress. He even mentioned Tina, and how she had worked behind the scenes, playing both sides to her advantage. By the time we hung up, I had a whole new set of evidence to add to my case. David's testimony alone could be a game changer. I was starting to feel the tide turning in my favor. The community was seeing the truth. I started getting calls from local news outlets, too, requests for interviews, questions about the ongoing legal battle. The media, once painting me as the villain, were now starting to ask the right questions. People were starting to connect the dots, and Tina Mullally motives were becoming clearer by the day. But in the midst of all this, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fight wasn't just about me anymore. One night, as I sat on the porch with my mother, a thought crossed my mind. I turned to her, feeling the weight of the moment. "Mom, I don't know if I can do this. It feels like I'm fighting a losing battle." She looked at me, her expression soft but steady. "Your grandfather fought these kinds of battles, you know," she said, her voice quiet. "He knew the laws, knew how to protect his land. It wasn't just about the property, it was about preserving our family's legacy." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about my family's history, our roots in this soil. My grandfather had faced challenges like this and come out the other side. Maybe I could, too. I sat there in silence, the weight of my family's legacy pressing down on me. This fight had become more than I ever expected. It was about protecting everything we had worked so hard to build. And I wasn't going to back down. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, I could hardly believe it. The developers, the corrupt officials, and Tina Mullally were all ordered to cease construction on my land. And not only that, they were to pay restitution for their fraudulent actions. I sat there in the courtroom, staring at the papers in front of me, trying to let the words sink in. It was a victory, sure. But it didn't feel like a clean win. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of everything that had happened. My heart should have been racing with excitement, but instead, it was weighed down by a sense of bittersweet relief. The damage had been done. My relationship with the neighbors, my community, had been fractured, maybe beyond repair. I turned to Jim, who was sitting beside me, and he gave me a small, knowing nod. "You did it," he said, his voice low but full of pride. "Yeah," I muttered, feeling empty. "But at what cost?" The whole reason I'd been fighting in the first place was to protect what I had, but now that I had won, it didn't feel like everything was back to normal. The trust that had been broken with my neighbors couldn't be fixed overnight. I could see the hurt in their eyes, and I knew they had been manipulated by Tina. The thought of what she'd done to turn them against me gnawed at me. A few days later, there was a community meeting called to discuss the outcome. I knew it was time to confront Tina and the officials face to face. The weight of that moment hit me as I walked into the room, and I could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood on me. Tina stood at the front, her usual smug expression gone, replaced by something closer to nervousness. She was trying to pull herself together, but I could see the cracks. When the floor was open for public comments, I stood up, my hands shaking a little, but I couldn't back down now. "Tina," I said, my voice steady as I looked straight at her. "You've been lying to these people. Manipulating them into believing I was the one ruining their neighborhood. You've used your connections to push a development project that was never meant to happen. And now the truth is out." I could feel the crowds shift, there was a collective gasp. People who had been silent for so long were suddenly murmuring, and I could see it in their faces: doubt. Realization. "I've got the evidence," I continued, holding up the papers. "The emails, the contracts, everything you tried to cover up. You're not the victim here. You're the villain." Tina shifted uncomfortably, her face paling as the crowd began to turn against her. One by one, neighbors stood up, people who had kept their distance from me. They spoke up, calling out Tina's manipulation. I watched as her support crumbled, one person after another. By the end of the meeting, Tina's reputation was in tatters. She had no defenders left. And I, for the first time in months, felt something like peace. Not just for me, but for the whole community. The truth had come out, and they realized they'd been manipulated. As the meeting ended, I heard people begin to rally behind me. The injustice wasn't just mine to bear anymore, it was a shared weight, and we were stronger for carrying it together. I never imagined it would take everything I had to get here. The stress, the sleepless nights, the endless questioning of myself, it was all so much. There were moments when I felt like I was barely holding on, but now that it's over, I can see just how far I've come. I've reclaimed the land, sure. But it's more than that. I've reclaimed the respect of my neighbors, the community I was born into. People I thought I'd lost forever, people who were manipulated into turning against me, are starting to come around. They see the truth now. It hasn't been easy. It's never easy to break through years of lies, to mend wounds caused by someone who twisted people's trust. But now I can stand in front of my ranch, looking at the land that's been in my family for generations, and feel like I'm truly connected to it in a way I wasn't before. I've fought for it, for its future, and for the future of everyone who depends on it. The hardest part, though, was realizing just how much I had changed in the process. For so long, I saw myself as just a rancher, a man tied to the land, doing what my family had done for decades. But through all this, I've become more than that. I've become someone who stood up for what's right, who fought not just for the land, but for justice. I didn't just protect my family's legacy, I strengthened it. And now, the fight is behind me. I've won, but the work is far from over. I'm no longer just concerned with defending what we have, now I'm looking forward to building something better. The community that was divided by lies is starting to come together, and it feels like we're on the edge of something new. We're going to work together to improve the area, to make it stronger, to foster cooperation rather than division. I was walking around the property the other day, taking in the quiet. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the peace of knowing the fight was over, that it had been worth it. And I couldn't help but think of my grandfather, of everything he went through to keep this land in the family. It's a legacy that can't be erased. There's a part of me that will always be that rancher, but there's another part now, one that's more determined, more confident. I'm proud of what I've done. Proud of how far I've come. And no matter what happens next, I know I'll always fight for what's right.